If you want to see like the most advanced preventative healthcare system operating in the UK right now, you actually shouldn't be looking at a modern hospital.
No, definitely not.
Right. You should literally be looking inside the stomach of a dairy cow.
It sounds absurd, but it's completely true.
It is. And right now, the UK government is pouring, get this, £50 million into this massive agricultural technology upgrade.
Which is just a staggering amount of capital.
Yeah, and the sheer level of engineering being deployed behind these barn doors is just, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So to everyone listening, whether you're, managing a 300-head dairy herd, or you're optimizing an arable rotation, or honestly, if you're just fascinated by the hidden mechanics of where your food comes from, welcome to the deep dive.
It's a really fascinating topic today.
It really is. Today, we are jumping straight into the April 2026 issue of Farming Monthly National. And our goal for you today is pretty specific, right? We're breaking down the tactical roadmap for adopting these new digital health monitoring systems and smart farm infrastructure.
Exactly, because we are looking at a really critical inflection point for the industry here.
For sure.
The government grants currently on the table, they represent this unique liquidity event. And it's designed to fundamentally alter how food is produced in this country.
Basically dragging it into the future.
Right, transitioning farms from this kind of reactive management, like waiting for a problem to happen, to proactive, data-driven ecosystems. So we're going to dissect the strategic maneuvers you need to secure this capital before the impending April deadline.
Which is coming up fast.
Very fast. And we'll also deconstruct the physiological mechanics of this internal bolus technology and, look at how structural engineering is actually being utilized to combat the biological impacts of climate change on livestock.
Yeah, and as we unpack the physics and the biology and, the economics of all this, I just have to point out our studio backdrop for this deep dive.
It's pretty striking today.
It really sets the mood. We've brought the data to life visually for you. So right behind you, there's this projection of a highly connected, futuristic barn.
Yeah, it looks like a sci-fi movie in here.
It really does. You can see autonomous feed pushers moving around. The climate control systems are actively responding to these external humidity sensors. And the vital signs of the virtual herd are just streaming past in real time.
It's the perfect visual anchor for what we're talking about.
Right. But all of this advanced infrastructure requires immense capital, which brings us directly to that £50 million the government has placed on the table through the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund, or the ATF 2026.
Yeah, and the structure of that £50 million injection is it's highly intentional.
How so?
Well, DFRA, the Department for Environment, Food, and Rural Affairs, they haven't just offered a blanket subsidy and said, here's the money, go buy stuff.
Right, it's not a free-for-all.
Exactly. They have very specifically compartmentalized the capital to address 3 acute systemic vulnerabilities within UK agriculture.
Okay, break those down for us.
So the first tranche is £20 million, specifically isolated for productivity.
Productivity, got it.
Right. This targets the mechanical bottlenecks. So how to extract greater yield per hectare or per animal unit while simultaneously suppressing those heavy input costs like fuel, synthetic fertilizers, and, manual labor.
Okay, and then we have the second £20 million allocation, right, which the magazine says is ring-fenced entirely for animal health and welfare.
That's correct. And that's where the funding for the internal bolus systems and the climate-resilient infrastructure live.
Which we're going to get way into shortly. And then the final £10 million is dedicated strictly to slurry management.
Yes. And when you look at those 3 pillars side by side, productivity, welfare, slurry, it's very clear the government isn't just trying to make farming slightly more profitable.
Right. They're not just tweaking the margins.
No, they are attempting to engineer environmental compliance and biological efficiency into the very foundation of the business model itself.
That makes total sense. And the financial leverage being offered to you, the individual farm business, is pretty substantial. We're looking at grant allocations spanning from a baseline of £1,000 up to £25,000 per specific theme.
And crucially, those are stackable.
Wait, really? So you can apply for all 3?
Exactly. A business that's addressing vulnerabilities across all 3 domains, say, optimizing crop sprayers under productivity, installing digital health monitoring under welfare, and upgrading waste separation under slurry, they can actually draw down a maximum theoretical ceiling of £75,000.
Wow. Okay, 75 grand. But the mechanics of that drawdown are really vital to understand, right? Because this isn't just a blank check.
No, not at all. It's a match funding scenario.
Right. So the grant covers a maximum of 50% of the eligible equipment costs. So like if you're integrating a 70,000-pound robotic milking system, the government is absorbing 35,000 pounds of that capital expenditure.
Which is huge. But there's a catch.
Always a catch.
The most critical data point in this entire magazine is the deadline.
Oh, yeah. The deadline is brutal.
It is midday, not the close of business, not midnight. It is strictly 12:00 p.m. on April 28th, 2026.
Midday. That is so specific. Like, why not just 5 p.m. like every other deadline in the world?
It is rigid, but the rigidity of that deadline is actually forcing a behavioral shift in the industry.
How do you mean?
Well, this represents the final iteration of the FETF in its current standalone format before the entire agricultural transition framework evolves again in 2027.
Ah, okay. So the rules are changing next year.
Exactly. So the certainty of this capital only exists in this immediate, very narrow window.
Which makes the advice from Robert Kirk incredibly compelling.
Yes, his perspective is fascinating.
Yes. So for context, Robert Kirk is the UK country sales manager at Smaxtech, which is one of the companies pioneering these internal health management systems. And his core strategic advice to farmers looking at that April 28th deadline feels, honestly, entirely counterintuitive to standard business practice.
It really does.
He argues that you should apply for the funding immediately, like today. Secure your allocation, but explicitly wait until after the grant is approved to finalize exactly which technological system you are actually going to deploy on the farm.
Right. And the underlying psychology and strategic brilliance of Kirk's position there just cannot be overstated.
Break that down for me, because usually you want to know exactly what you're buying before you ask for the money, right?
Normally, yes. But in a high-pressure, capital-intensive environment like this, forcing a decision on complex enterprise software and hardware before the funding is even guaranteed, it triggers severe analysis paralysis.
Oh, absolutely. You just freeze up.
Exactly. The permutations of sensor arrays, data integration capabilities, hardware compatibility, they're endless. So if a farm manager attempts to map out the perfect, flawless technological architecture while simultaneously racing a midday government deadline,
Yeah, your brain would melt.
the resulting cognitive load almost guarantees a poorly optimized decision. Or worse, you miss the application window entirely while you're busy reading spec sheets.
It's like securing an options contract in the financial markets,
Yeah,
right?
it's a great analogy.
Yeah, you're paying a minimal upfront premium, in this case, just the administrative time to file the initial application, to reserve the right to purchase the asset later. You're locking in the liquidity first.
Precisely.
Because once that approval lands and the April deadline evaporates, the adrenaline drops. You aren't panic buying a system anymore. You can actually sit down, look at your veterinary bills, analyze your yield data, and pinpoint whether your highest marginal losses are coming from, say, metabolic issues in the transition period or late-stage lameness.
Right, you get to buy the cure for the specific disease your balance sheet actually has.
Exactly.
And by absorbing 50% of the capital expenditure, the government is fundamentally de-risking the entire innovation curve here.
Which is necessary, right? Because farming margins are tight.
Notoriously unforgiving. Expecting a business to self-fund the entire risk of acting as an early adopter for, unproven telemetry networks, it's economically unfeasible for most.
Yeah, you can't bet the farm on a fancy thermometer.
Exactly. So the match funding creates a financial safety net, allowing businesses to test and integrate these digital layers without betting their entire equity on a single hardware upgrade.
And what's interesting is the urgency of that capital liquidity is visually reinforced throughout the entire magazine.
The advertising layout is incredibly coordinated.
It really is. I mean, you flip through the pages and you have these massive, unavoidable banners shouting, "Make the most of FTF grants," just acting as this primary catalyst.
Blaring sirens, essentially.
Right. But immediately adjacent to those, you see advertisements for UK agricultural finance. And they're specifically promoting rapid short-term lending facilities with turnarounds of just 2 to 4 weeks.
It's a very clever pairing.
They're providing the exact mechanism to solve the match funding problem we just talked about.
Yes, the visual synergy of those advertisements creates a complete ecosystem of financial execution for the reader.
Yeah, the government banner signals, hey, subsidized capital is available.
And the agricultural finance advert addresses the immediate cash flow friction. because even with a 50% grant, injecting tens of thousands of pounds into capital expenditure requires liquidity that might currently be tied up in feed inventories or livestock equity.
You might be land rich and cash poor.
Exactly. So high-loading a 2-week loan approval process removes that final structural barrier to entry. It communicates to the farmer that the financial pipelines are primed and ready to facilitate this immediate modernization.
So, okay, the capital architecture is in place, the application strategy is defined. Let's look at the actual hardware executing this revolution.
This is the best part.
It really is. Under the animal health and welfare theme, the most fascinating technological leap, hands down, is the deployment of bolus-based telemetry systems, specifically the SmaxTech platform that's highlighted in the source material.
It's an incredible piece of engineering.
Right, so for a listener who might only be familiar with external health tracking, like a Fitbit for a cow, we need to explore the actual physiological mechanics here. How does a piece of hardware operate permanently inside the digestive tract of a ruminant?
Well, the anatomy of the system is just remarkable. So a bolus is a dense, scientifically weighted ceramic or metallic cylinder.
Kind of like a heavy pill-shaped device.
Exactly. And inside that cylinder, it encompasses a highly sophisticated sensor array, a micro battery, and a transmission antenna.
Wow.
And it is administered orally. So it travels down the cow's esophagus, and it utilizes its specific gravity, its weight, to bypass the rumen entirely.
Wait, it skips the main stomach compartment.
Yes, it drops past the rumen and settles permanently at the base of the reticulum.
Okay, the reticulum.
Right. And because of its precise weight and the anatomical structure of the reticular rumen, it remains completely stable and safe down there for the entire lifespan of the animal.
It just sits there forever.
Forever, effectively turning the cow into a walking, data-generating node on the farm's Wi-Fi network.
That is wild. It's less like a standard wearable fitness tracker and much more like, I don't know, an internal seismograph.
That's a really good way to put it.
Because it isn't merely counting steps, right? It's positioned at the exact biological epicenter of the cow's metabolic engine. It's measuring the microtremors of digestion and core temperature to catch the shock waves of an illness days before the earthquake actually hits the animal's outward physical behavior.
And that distinction between proactive and reactive management hinges entirely on that internal positioning.
Explain that. Why is inside so much better than outside?
Well, when you're relying on external observation, which is, the traditional stockman's eye, the diagnostic trigger relies entirely on clinical manifestation.
Meaning you have to actually see the cow acting sick.
Right. And by the time an animal physically isolates herself or exhibits a depressed stance or leaves her feed at the bunk, the pathogenic cascade is already in its late stages.
The damage is done.
Exactly. The immune system is already heavily compromised, and the systemic inflammation has already triggered a severe suppression of milk synthesis.
At which point, the financial damage to your farm is already locked in. You're looking at a mandatory course of veterinary intervention. You might have potential antibiotic usage, which means the milk has to be withheld from the human supply chain for weeks.
Which is pure lost revenue.
Exactly. Plus a massive drop in the animal's overall lactation curve that she might never recover from during that entire cycle.
But the bolus telemetry intercepts that entire biological timeline.
Because it's already on the inside.
Exactly. Because it sits right in the reticulum, it captures core internal body temperature with an accuracy margin of a fraction of a degree.
Wow.
It continuously monitors the physical muscular contractions of rumination. It tracks water intake volume and frequency. So if a pathogen enters the cow system, the bolus detects the microfever spike and the slight subclinical depression in her rumination contractions up to 4 days before any physical symptom becomes visible to the human eye.
4 days. That is an eternity in terms of bacterial replication.
It really is. It changes everything.
And the economics of that early intervention are just staggering when you look at current market realities. The magazine specifically notes the severe fluctuations in the liquid milk market right now, contrasted against near-record valuations for beef and replacement cattle.
The margin of error is virtually zero.
Right. So if you have a high-yielding dairy cow generating thousands of pounds of revenue, and the bolus flags a metabolic imbalance early enough that a simple dose of calcium or like a mild anti-inflammatory resolves it in 12 hours.
That single intervention pays for the hardware of the bolus instantaneously.
Exactly. It fundamentally alters the veterinary calculus on the farm.
It really does, because Robert Kirk's emphasis on identifying pain points, that usually leads farm managers directly to transition cow management.
which is the most dangerous time for a cow, right?
Oh, absolutely. The critical weeks before and after calving, where the animal is under immense metabolic stress. The bolus data provides this incredibly high-resolution map of her calcium levels, her energy balance, and her immune response during that exact window.
So you can step in before she crashes.
Exactly. It allows for micro-interventions that preserve her genetic yield potential and completely eliminate the massive depreciation costs associated with involuntary culling, like having to sell a sick cow at a loss.
What I find brilliant about the marketing strategy in the magazine, though, is how they actively dismantle the intimidation factor of all this technology.
Yeah, they handle that very well visually.
Because, I mean, think about it. We are discussing highly complex internal telemetry, UHF data transmission, and algorithmic baseline modeling. It sounds like NASA.
It does.
Yet the imagery Smacks Tech uses in their ads features a young woman in a standard green fleece, standing in an ordinary messy dairy shed, just holding a simple handheld reader device.
Very relatable, everyday farming.
Exactly. And the close-up shots of the smartphone app. They don't show walls of code or dense API data streams. They just show a clean, intuitive user interface with simple little icons for temperature, drinking, and movement.
And that visual communication is highly calculated to overcome technological resistance.
Right, because farmers aren't software engineers.
Exactly. The demographic reality of agriculture includes a vast spectrum of digital literacy. If the software interface looks like a commercial aviation dashboard, the perceived friction of adoption is going to outweigh the physiological benefits.
People just won't use it.
Right. So by framing the data through the familiar vernacular of a modern smartphone application, it immediately telegraphs accessibility. It proves to the farmer that you do not need specialized data science training to interpret the metabolic status of your herd.
But wait, I have to ask, isn't there a huge risk in that simplification?
What do you mean?
Well, if the algorithm is taking thousands of data points, pH levels, temperature fluctuations, rumination rhythms, and distilling all of that down to a simple red or green icon on an app, isn't the farmer kind of surrendering their stockman's intuition to a black box?
I see what you're saying.
Like they are fundamentally trusting software developers in a distant office somewhere to determine the threshold for what constitutes a biological crisis on their specific farm.
That is the perpetual tension in automated diagnostics, and it is a highly valid critique.
Right.
The risk of the black box is real, that the operator loses the foundational understanding of the underlying biology. However, the most sophisticated platforms counter this by offering layered data access.
Okay, layered how?
So the dashboard provides the immediate binary alert action required, or no action required, for rapid daily workflow, because you don't have time to analyze graphs for 300 cows every morning.
Sure, you just need to know who's sick today.
Exactly. But the architecture still allows the manager, or the consulting veterinarian, to drill down into the raw longitudinal data arrays. They can actually go in and adjust those algorithmic thresholds based on the unique genetic or environmental baselines of that specific herd.
Okay, so the raw data is still there if you need to play with it.
Yes.
And speaking of environmental baselines, internal health is completely useless if the external environment surrounding the animal is acting as a biological furnace.
This is a massive issue.
Right. We all know the sheer metabolic heat a high-yielding Holstein generates just by existing.
Yeah.
But what is really striking in the source material is the urgent emphasis Galebreaker places on upgrading infrastructure immediately, utilizing these FTF grants to engineer climate resilience before the summer humidity spikes.
The physiological threat of heat stress requires a deep understanding of thermodynamics within a ruminant context.
Okay, let's unpack the thermodynamics of a cow.
Well, the modern dairy cow has been genetically selected for immense feed intake and milk production. The biological byproduct of fermenting 50 kilograms of dry matter in the rumen every single day is a colossal output of internal metabolic heat.
They're essentially walking fermentation vats.
They really are. Her baseline operating temperature is already significantly elevated compared to non-lactating livestock.
So when the external temperature humidity index, the THI as they call it, begins to rise, she loses her primary mechanism for cooling, right?
Exactly. The thermal gradient between her core temperature and the ambient air shrinks.
And because cows do not sweat efficiently like humans do, Their physiological response to heat is highly destructive to their productivity.
It is a rapid and economically devastating biological cascade.
Walk us through what actually happens to the cow when the shed gets too hot.
Okay, so as the THI crosses the critical threshold, which crucially occurs at much lower ambient temperatures in the UK due to naturally high atmospheric humidity, the cow's immediate physiological response is to drastically reduce her dry matter intake.
She just stops eating.
Right. She has to lower the metabolic heat being generated by the rumen, and this intake depression causes a near instantaneous crash in milk synthesis.
Boom. There goes your yield.
But it's actually the secondary behavioral impacts that cause the long-term structural damage.
Really? Like what?
Well, to maximize the surface area exposed to whatever ambient airflow exists, the cow will refuse to lie down in her cubicle.
Oh, because lying down traps the heat against her body and the floor.
Exactly. So she stands up in the alleys, and the physics of a 700-kilogram animal standing for 20 hours a day on solid concrete leads to immense pressure on the corium inside the hoof.
Ouch.
Which results in sole ulcers and severe lameness weeks after the heat wave has already passed.
Wow, so the heat wave ends, but you're still paying for it a month later in vet bills for lame cows.
Precisely. Furthermore, the blood flow is shunted away from the internal organs and the digestive tract, moving outward to the skin to aid in vasodilation and heat dissipation.
Trying to shed the heat.
Right. But doing that compromises the integrity of the gut lining. This leads to systemic inflammation, heavily suppressed fertility rates, and a severely weakened immune system that opens the door to mastitis.
That is terrifying.
It is. So when Ms. Rodriguez from Galebreaker advises farmers to upgrade, she isn't just selling ventilation. She is selling a biological defense mechanism against systemic herd failure.
And Galebreaker's approach isn't just about, like, bolting a fan to a wall.
No, it's much more sophisticated than that.
Right. They are utilizing the FTF grant framework to fund comprehensive environmental engineering. They conduct advanced housing assessments. They install localized microclimate sensors at the actual cow level because, as they point out, the temperature at the roof ridge is irrelevant if the air is stagnant down at the feed bunk where the cow actually is.
Absolutely.
And they generate these continuous data-driven heat map reports to dynamically adjust the airflow kinetics of the building.
It is literally the application of fluid dynamics to animal welfare.
Fluid dynamics in a cowshed.
Yes. And this is perfectly mirrored in the heavy-duty construction advertisements flanking the heat stress article in the magazine.
Yeah, I noticed that too. The layout is very intentional.
It is. The visual presence of Graham Heath Construction detailing their innovative steel structures and concrete panel systems highlighting materials engineered for strength, it reinforces the reality that manipulating macro environments requires massive physical infrastructure.
Exactly. I mean, here's the thing. You cannot take a herd of high-metabolism, genetically advanced dairy cattle, place them in a low-roofed, unventilated, asbestos-sheeted shed built back in 1965, and expect internal boluses to somehow save them from a modern, humid summer.
The math just doesn't work.
Right. The volume of air required to clear the moisture, the ammonia, and the thermal output of those animals necessitates those sweeping steel spans and precisely engineered ridge ventilation shown in those construction ads. The concrete and the steel are acting as primary health interventions just as much as the digital sensors are.
The structural engineering is the absolute prerequisite for the biological performance.
Perfectly said.
And once that optimized physical environment is constructed, the grant funding shifts focus to automating the repetitive, high-frequency physical tasks occurring within that space.
Right, the daily grind stuff.
Exactly. This is where the smart dairy ecosystem truly materializes under the productivity and welfare themes.
Because if you've upgraded the climate architecture and you have real-time data on the herd's internal health, managing the physical inputs manually just becomes the glaring bottleneck.
It's the next logical step.
So the grants heavily incentivize automation, starting right at the feed face. We see funding for robotic silage pushers. Now, the biology of feed intake dictates that cows naturally sort their feed, right?
They do. They're very picky eaters.
Right. They push the ration away from the feed fence as they eat, rapidly putting the most nutritious elements completely out of reach.
And traditionally, Rectifying that requires a human operator in a diesel tractor driving through the barn multiple times a day to physically push the ration back to the fence.
Which is awful.
It is labor-intensive, it's carbon-heavy, and frankly, it just never happens frequently enough because farmers are busy.
Yeah, you can't be on a tractor 24/7.
But an autonomous robotic pusher navigates the feed alley continuously, 24 hours a day. By ensuring the ration is always within physical reach, it stimulates natural, frequent, smaller feeding behaviors.
Instead of them gorging all at once.
Exactly. This stabilizes the rumen pH, prevents the metabolic crashes associated with slub feeding, and significantly increases overall dry matter intake.
Which, as we know, directly correlates to higher milk yield.
Precisely.
Okay, so then we move from the adult herd down to the calves, which brings us to the calf expert system. And rearing replacement heifers is arguably the most delicate, risk-intensive phase of the entire dairy life cycle.
Without a doubt.
Right. If you want to talk about identifying pain points, calf mortality and morbidity linked to nutritional inconsistency or pathogen exposure in the first 8 weeks of life will absolutely cripple a farm's future profitability.
The physiological vulnerability of the neonatal calf requires absolute precision.
They're so fragile.
Very. And the calf expert acts as an intelligent, automated rearing hub. The even milk technology it employs solves a massive biological challenge.
Okay, explain the biology here because calf digestion is weird.
It is. A calf's digestive system relies on the esophageal groove reflex to bypass the rumen and deliver milk directly to the abomasum.
Right, because the rumen isn't developed yet.
Exactly. But if the concentration, the temperature, or the volume of the milk replacer fluctuates wildly from feed to feed, or if the transition between whole milk and powdered formula is abrupt.
Which happens easily when a human is mixing it in buckets.
Right. And when that happens, it destroys the gut flora, leading to severe nutritional scouring and rapid dehydration.
But the even milk system acts like, I don't know, a highly advanced barista machine, but for livestock.
That's exactly what it is.
It continuously analyzes the available supply of whole milk, and it dynamically perfectly balances it with powdered milk replacer on a micro level, ensuring the exact specific gravity and nutritional profile remains absolutely stable at every single feeding.
Consistency is everything for a calf.
And the hygiene station component automatically flushes and sterilizes the feeding hoses and teats after every single use, fundamentally breaking the chain of bacterial transmission between calves.
The reduction in pathogen load, combined with the elimination of nutritional stress, it creates a biological environment where the calf can dedicate its entire energy intake to structural growth and immune development.
Rather than just fighting off low-level digestive infections all day.
Exactly.
Now, we have automated the feeding, we've digitized the digestion, we've engineered the airflow, but the technology in this magazine that completely stops you in your tracks, and I know you agree with me here, is the cow toilet.
Oh, it's brilliant.
I will admit, the nomenclature sounds like a complete parody. The cow toilet.
It does induce a chuckle.
It does. But when you bypass the name and actually look at the underlying chemistry and the environmental compliance implications, it is an absolute masterclass in treating the root cause of pollution, rather than just managing the symptoms.
It really is. The cow toilet directly addresses the slurry management theme, which, is heavily scrutinized right now due to the severe environmental impact of ammonia emissions.
Right, and the fundamental chemistry of agricultural ammonia production is actually quite simple, isn't it?
Very simple. Cow urine contains high concentrations of urea. Solid cow feces contain an enzyme called urease.
Okay, urea and urease.
Right. And when those two elements are isolated from one another, they are relatively stable.
But the moment they mix on the concrete floor of a traditional barn,
that's where the problem starts.
Right. The urease acts as a catalyst, rapidly hydrolyzing the urea. This chemical reaction volatilizes into ammonia gas, which rises into the atmosphere, contributes heavily to particulate air pollution, and eventually falls back to Earth, causing severe nitrogen loading and acidification in sensitive ecological habitats.
It's a massive environmental liability.
And the traditional mitigation strategy is just awful. You scrape this highly reactive, toxic slurry into a massive holding lagoon, put a lid on it, and attempt to manage the chemical fallout through expensive treatment or highly regulated spreading windows.
But the engineering philosophy of the cow toilet intercepts the chemical reaction before it can even initiate.
Which is the genius of it. How does it physically work?
Well, it operates as a localized feeding station. As the animal enters the station to get some feed, a mechanical arm gently applies pressure to the suspensory ligament of the udder.
Okay.
This physical stimulation triggers a natural, involuntary neurological pathway, the micturition reflex prompting the cow to urinate.
It literally tickles them into peeing.
Effectively, yes. And the system captures the urine instantly in a sealed, dedicated receptacle, routing it completely away from the solid manure.
Keeping the urea and urease separated.
Exactly. And by fundamentally preventing the urea from ever encountering the urease enzyme, Wageningen and livestock research verified that this specific intervention reduces total ammonia emissions by up to 38%.
A 38% reduction in atmospheric ammonia simply by redesigning the physical interaction of waste streams at the source.
It proves that the most efficient environmental compliance strategy is just applied physics and chemistry.
That is incredible. And the broader aesthetic of this automated future is heavily curated by the visual elements throughout the magazine, too.
The photography is very striking.
It is. Like when you see the full-page spread of the Fullwood Jaws M2 Merlin robotic molker, this massive gleaming architecture of stainless steel, lasers, and pneumatic arms, set alongside the robust imagery of the Isuzu D-Max EV, which is the UK's first fully electric agricultural pickup truck. It recalibrates the entire visual identity of the industry.
The visual subtext to the farmer is maturity.
Yes, these are not experimental prototypes being tested in some university lab.
No, the robotic milking architectures, the zero-emission transport vectors, the automated feed logic, these are industrially hardened, field-tested platforms ready for immediate commercial deployment.
The risk of being a technological beta tester has been completely eliminated.
Precisely. Or rather, the focus now shifts entirely from, does it work, to integration.
Integrating it all together.
Right. And that integration does not stop at the barn doors. The data networks we are establishing for the livestock are actively mirroring the digital revolution occurring simultaneously out in the soil.
Right, because the productivity grants cast a massive net over arable operations too, emphasizing precision intervention over broad-spectrum application.
Let's examine that arable transition, because treating an entire 100-hectare field as a single, uniform biological entity is economically and environmentally obsolete at this point.
It's just wasting money.
Exactly. So the grants provide heavy capital support for camera-guided inter-row sprayers.
Oh, these are fascinating. We have to look at the optics and the computer vision driving this.
It's basically self-driving car technology applied to weed control.
Exactly. Instead of a tractor just broadcasting chemical herbicides blindly across every square inch of the crop canopy, these booms are equipped with high-resolution multispectral cameras.
And the computational velocity of these systems is extraordinary.
Because it's moving fast, right?
Right. As the sprayer boom travels across the field at, say, 10 to 12 kilometers per hour, the optical sensors utilize edge computing and trained neural networks to instantly differentiate between the specific spectral signature and leaf morphology of the cash crop, say, winter wheat.
And the physical shape of a competing weed, like blackgrass.
Exactly. The system recognizes the weed, calculates the exact trajectory, and triggers a micro-pneumatic nozzle to fire a targeted microdose of herbicide exclusively onto the leaves of the invasive plant,
leaving the surrounding crop and the bare soil completely untouched.
The reduction in chemical volume is massive.
I mean, it slashes input costs drastically, minimizes the chemical stress on the cash crop, and fundamentally reduces the toxic runoff entering the watershed.
And that precision logic extends to the hydration of the crop as well.
Water management, right.
The grant funding for large-scale rainwater harvesting infrastructure acknowledges the increasing volatility of the hydrological cycle we're facing.
Climate change is making rain very unpredictable.
Exactly. Capturing immense volumes of precipitation from the expansive roof areas of modern agricultural buildings during those concentrated winter deluge events, it provides a critical buffer.
It builds drought resilience.
It does. It ensures irrigation capacity or livestock drinking water during the increasingly frequent prolonged dry spells, mitigating the severe yield penalties of water stress.
But the true power here, and this ties it all back together, is how all these physical tools are bound together by software.
The data layer.
Right. The deep dive highlights applications like Agri's Contour platform. And this isn't just like a digital map on an iPad. It's a comprehensive agronomic engine.
It's incredibly powerful.
It ingests high-resolution satellite imagery, utilizing normalized difference vegetation index, or NDVI scanning, to measure the exact photosynthetic vigor of the crop canopy down to the square meter.
And when you overlay that satellite data with historical yield mapping and granular soil sampling, the Contour software generates highly precise variable rate application algorithms.
Variable rate, meaning the tractor changes what it's doing on the fly.
Yes. The farm manager no longer applies a uniform 200 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare across the whole field.
Right.
The tractor's onboard computer reads the Contour prescription map in real time. It instantly increases the fertilizer rate in zones with high yield potential and fertile soil, while dialing the rate back to almost zero in areas where the soil is inherently thin or sandy.
Where additional nitrogen would just wash away anyway.
Exactly, where it would just leach away rather than drive growth. It is the absolute optimization of the profit margin per square meter.
The data reveals the hidden economic realities of the landscape. And physically interacting with that data-driven landscape requires specialized mechanical tools.
Like the Opieco harrow.
Yes, the magazine visually highlights the vibrant red Opieco top stridal straw harrow. It looks like a massive steel comb, but the physics of its operation are deeply tied to regenerative principles.
The harrow interacts with the very top layer of the soil profile?
Right, it doesn't plow deep.
No. Its rapidly vibrating tines shatter the surface crust, creating a microtilth. This precise mechanical disruption serves multiple purposes. It evenly distributes harvest residue to accelerate organic breakdown.
It breaks the capillary action of the soil to lock in subsurface moisture.
And crucially, it exposes weed seeds to a flash of light and oxygen, triggering a weed chit.
A weed chit, which is a massive coordinated germination of weeds, right?
Yes. And once those weeds germinate, they can be mechanically destroyed by a secondary pass, drastically reducing the seed bank in the soil without relying on a single drop of synthetic herbicide.
It is mechanical weed control guided by digital timing.
Brilliant stuff.
It really is. But the scope of this funding reaches even further beyond the machinery, touching the very fabric of the ecological landscape with the Lowland Peatwater Discovery Grant.
This specific tranche, which is £4.5 million, with an application deadline of June 26, it represents a profound shift in governmental strategy.
How so?
Well, lowland peatlands are some of the most critical terrestrial carbon sinks on the planet. However, centuries of aggressive agricultural drainage have oxidized the peat, turning a vital carbon sink into a massive source of atmospheric carbon emissions.
Oh, wow. So draining it ruins it.
Yes. And reversing this requires incredibly complex hydrological engineering.
And the visual representation of this grant in the magazine is incredibly evocative.
It's a very different tone from the rest of the ads.
Completely. It isn't a photograph of an advanced tractor or a glowing digital dashboard. It is an image of two people standing shoulder to shoulder, looking out over a vast, windswept, heavily saturated lowland peat landscape.
The imagery is doing the heavy lifting here.
It really is. It's signaling that the ultimate objective of these grants isn't just localized hardware acquisition, it is landscape-scale environmental stewardship.
And the photography explicitly communicates the necessity of collaboration.
Because you can't re-wet half a bog.
Exactly. Hydrology does not respect property lines. You cannot sustainably raise the water table to re-wet the peat on one farm if the neighboring property is actively running deep drainage pumps.
They just pump your water away.
Right. So the grant heavily prioritizes applications that build coalitions, bringing together adjacent landowners, internal drainage boards, ecologists, and local wildlife trusts.
It acknowledges that manipulating the environment for long-term survival is a deeply communal, highly collaborative engineering challenge.
It has to be a group effort.
It does. But I have to pause here and challenge this entire ecosystem we've just built.
Okay, lay it on me.
Because we have covered an immense amount of digital terrain today.
Yeah.
And if I'm managing this operation, my phone is now receiving push notifications from the calf expert about a drop in milk replacer intake.
Right.
The SmaxTech Bolus app is alerting me to a 0.2 degree temperature spike in cow 114.
Yep.
The Gillbreaker environmental sensors are warning me about rising humidity in barn 3, and the Contour app is sending satellite NDVI updates on the winter wheat.
It's a lot of data.
It's an avalanche of data. Are we fundamentally replacing the physical exhaustion of manual labor with the crushing psychological burden of alarm fatigue? Like, are farmers just going to spend their entire lives reacting to an endless barrage of digital sirens?
That is the defining vulnerability of the entire Agriculture 5.0 paradigm.
It has to be.
Alarm fatigue is a systemic risk that can paralyze operational efficiency. If a manager is subjected to a continuous stream of raw, unfiltered telemetry, the psychological response is eventually just to ignore the dashboard entirely.
You just turn the phone off.
Exactly. Which is why the initial strategy we discussed, securing the funding first and carefully selecting the technology second, is so critical. The defining metric of a superior technological platform is not the volume of data it can generate, it is the sophistication of its filtering algorithms.
So the software has to do the heavy lifting.
It has to. It cannot just dump the raw telemetry onto the user.
Right. So like if the bolus detects a drop in rumination, a slight temperature increase, and a decrease in water intake, the app shouldn't send 3 separate frantic alerts.
No, that would be terrible design. The internal algorithm must synthesize those 3 data points, cross-reference them against the cow's historical baseline, recognize the biological pattern of early-stage mastitis, and send a single, calm, actionable directive.
Like Cow 114, high probability of infection, isolate and administer anti-inflammatory protocol.
Exactly. If the technology increases the cognitive load of the manager, it is functionally defective. The system must operate as a silent analytical partner in the background, only breaking the threshold of attention when human intervention is absolutely required.
The integration must yield clarity, not chaos.
Exactly.
That clarity is the ultimate goal. So let us synthesize the tactical intelligence from this deep dive for you, the listener.
Yeah, let's summarize it.
If you are operating a farm business, the strategic mandate here is extremely clear. The government is offering immense capital liquidity to underwrite your technological transition.
50 million pounds of it.
Right. So identify the specific high-friction vulnerabilities within your operation, whether that is calf mortality, feed waste, or heat stress.
Secure your place in the funding queue.
Yes. File the FETF application before the absolute deadline of midday, April 28th, 2026. Do it now. Pick the gear later. Utilize that capital to deploy internal telemetry, engineer climate-resilient architecture, and integrate automation that forces the data to work for you, not the other way around.
The transformation occurring behind the hedgerows right now is just profound.
It really is.
Agriculture is rapidly shedding its analog constraints, evolving into an industry governed by biological algorithms, precision chemistry, and real-time telemetry.
And understanding the depth and scale of this integration is vital for anyone who relies on the stability of the global food supply chain, which is all of us.
It absolutely is.
It's a revolution of unprecedented scale. But as we close this analysis, I do want to leave you with a lingering, somewhat philosophical question regarding this whole trajectory we're on.
Okay, let's hear it.
We are installing sensors in the soil, cameras on the sprayers, and telemetry inside the stomachs of the livestock. We are feeding millions of data points into centralized machine learning algorithms year after year, right?
Yes, massive data sets.
So as these AI systems ingest the genetic potential, the metabolic rhythms, and the yield histories of every single plant and animal, there is a rapidly approaching horizon where the artificial intelligence understands the biological nuances of the herd with infinitely more precision than the human being who walks the barn.
That's entirely plausible.
Right. So when the digital architecture inevitably becomes the ultimate master stockman, what exactly does the human element of farming become?
Wow. That shifts the entire paradigm. It forces an industry to profoundly question the future definition of husbandry itself.
It fundamentally rewrites the relationship between humanity and the land. Thank you for joining us as we map the bleeding edge of agricultural technology. Keep analyzing the systems around you, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
Goodbye, everyone. Keep exploring.